Welcome to my 209th video on my work with OO gauge. This part will be all about old Triang Princess Royal class locomotive models, featuring 3 examples that I have with 2-rail and 3-rail running, and various other stuff such as taking a smoke generator apart and converting one of these models to run 3-rail. The original Triang model of the LMS Princess Royal class is essentially the oldest, the original Triang locomotive model. In fact, strictly speaking, it predates Triang model railways entirely. The plastic-bodied Princess Royal class model was introduced in 1951 in this train set, which was produced by Rovex Plastics Limited for the 1951 Christmas market in response to a request from Marks & Spencer's for sale in their department stores. That initial model was of Princess Elizabeth in BR black livery. It was driven by DC electric current up to around 12 volts, like Hornby Dublo, but instead of picking up from the rails via the wheels, that initial model picked up from the rails via plunger pickups on either side of the loco, just in front of the rear pony truck, as seen here. The Lines brothers, creators of the Triang brand, because there were 3 Lines brothers and 3 lines make a triangle, were impressed by what Rovex had done with their first model train set, and wanting to get into producing model railways themselves, they bought out Rovex and established Triang model railways based on Rovex's initial work. The model wasn't really a terribly accurate representation of the real Princess Elizabeth. You can see here the Rovex model at the top and a photo of the real loco at the bottom. Most notably, the model is considerably shorter and stumpier in proportion than the real thing. This was presumably done deliberately in order to create a model that could run on model railways in small spaces with tight curves. The original Rovex model also, as can be seen here, did not include any representation of the locomotive's valve gear. After the Lines brothers took over Rovex, they produced a revised version of the Princess Elizabeth model under the Triang brand. This is one of the earliest Triang Princess models. They got rid of the plunger pickups and switched to pick up through the wheels, and they switched to using tension lock couplings, as would become standard for Triang railways, with some variants. This model appears not to have the very earliest type of tension lock coupling. This model still has no representation of the valve gear. It's a little more detailed than the Rovex version. For example, there are separately fitted metal handrails on the boiler and the smoke box here. Here's a picture of pretty much the next iteration in the evolution of the model. This version has some basic representation of the valve gear, although it doesn't appear particularly accurate. This version is also in lined crimson, and the first loco of the class, Princess Royal rather than Princess Elizabeth, is represented. It is still represented as in BR service. I recently bought 2 more examples of the Triang Princess Royal class to add to the one that I picked up some time ago. This slightly odd-looking version came to me all the way from Australia. Given its lack of valve gear, and also the fact that it has moulded plastic handrails rather than separately fitted metal ones, this would appear to have started life as a very early Triang version of the model. As such, it would doubtless have been in British Railways livery, probably BR black, when it was sold. Someone has refinished it in red. They've also added more realistic coal to the tender. They've used printed paper for the LMS letters, running number and nameplate, which is less than ideal, but it's actually less obvious than you might think when the loco's on the layout. I tried that model on my test track. It ran okay, although it was a bit noisy. It has wheels of an early Triang type with very large flanges, which may well cause trouble running over points, etc. on modern track. At pretty much the same time, I also bought on eBay UK this version. This is still quite an old Triang version, but made around 20 years after the original Rovex version. This version represents Princess Elizabeth in LMS crimson livery with limited lining. It also has various extra features, a smoke generator, exhaust steam sound, and decals for alternate names and numbers. The exhaust steam sound is created simply by a sort of flap on the back axle of the tender rubbing against some sort of abrasive surface on a piece of spring, which is then connected to a sounding box. The abrasive spring was a bit worn on my model, but it did still make some sort of sound. This model was quite nice looking, although it was made of very shiny plastic and the crimson colour was a bit odd. The smoke generator was installed under the chimney. The idea was that oil would be put into the smoke generator through the chimney, then a heating element would produce smoke from the oil, which was intended to be pumped from the chimney in a rhythmic way by a piston driven off the motor worm. The body retaining screw is in front here, because the smoke generator's under the chimney. The older, repainted model didn't have a smoke generator, and in this case the body retaining screw was in the chimney itself. Here are my two princesses on my test tracks. They both ran fine in simple back-and-forth tests like this. The newer version with the smoke generator also came with all of its original paperwork. Here you can see a printed sheet about the alternate names and numbers and the 2 sheets of decals supplied. Here's a close-up of the particulars of the alternate names and numbers for the Princess Royal class. Note also the instructions, which indicate that these are water slide decals. You're supposed to wet them and slide them off, not just cut them out and stick them on. Here's a close-up of the decals themselves. They were covered with protective tissue, which I didn't attempt to remove. It's a bit doubtful whether waterslide decals of this age would still work, although they appear in good condition. Here's the main operating instruction sheet. I believe that the stamp at top right would indicate that this model was issued in November 1972, so that would be just over 20 years after the initial Rovex train set. The front has general instructions about track setup, couplings, etc. The sheet was a double fold. Inside were more details on powering, operating the smoke generator, etc. On the back were further details on lubrication and maintenance, TV suppression and spare parts. I note that even though this appears to be a fairly late example, the instruction sheet is still branded Rovex Triang on the back, although it does say Triang Hornby on the front. Here's the end of the box for that model. The NS after the product number indicates the fitting with noise and smoke. I put some mineral oil into the smoke generator to see if it might work. Well, it runs okay on the rolling road, but I don't see any sign of the smoke doing anything, so I put some mineral oil in the smoke generator, but I don't see any signs of it doing anything, which is perhaps just as well. Probably the element in I'm just seeing if it feels as if it's getting warm at all. No, not really. And the worst thing about smoke generators is they can melt, they can overheat and melt the plastic. I kind of think it's maybe running a little faster now as it warms up. Turn it down too much, but where are we? I don't know. So no, I don't think you can say it runs. I have no objection, no problems with it running. Of course, you don't hear the chuff-chuff sound now because it's actually made by the wheels of the tender turning. They do make a noise slightly, but of course the wheels of the tender are not turning on here, so. But no, I don't see the smoke generator doing anything. I'm getting confused what button you press with this camera for movie recording. While we're at it, here's the other one on the rolling road. Running, but it doesn't seem to be running terribly evenly exactly, does it? Now, this one doesn't have a smoke generator. This one just has a screw in its chimney, so... And it's a bit odd. Someone's repainted it. I don't know what it came as originally, and they've stuck paper, numbers and letters and a rather iffy sort of paper nameplate on it, but it's a bit odd, but still kind of interesting in its own way. And let's as far out as we can go. Yeah, so there you go. We'll get them onto the layout and run them a bit. Anyway, let's see if we can have a little look at these Triang Princess class locos running on the layout. I've got them both hooked up now with trains. That's the one with sound and smoke, supposedly. The smoke doesn't work at all and the sound's not very noticeable now. And I've got him hooked up with some beautiful sort of ex-Caledonian coaches that came with the Caledonian single-wheeler train pack, and then that's the rather strange older sort of one that's been finished in bright red, and I've got him hooked up with 3 of the very old Triang type ex-Caledonian coaches, which are not anywhere near as nice as those newer Hornby ones, but he does not run too well on this track, this guy. He's okay going on the, just the regular track, but he really struggles over the points. I think, it's just those old Triang wheels and whatever. Whether I can even keep him running over the points is a bit dubious. He really struggles, but we'll see what we can do. I'm using these Morley handheld controllers, which quite honestly are really annoying to work with after the Gauge Master one I've got on the 3-rail. I'd much prefer the Gauge Master one, which just has a switch for forward and reverse, and you turn it all the way down to stop it. These stop in the middle, you see, and they don't even have any détente on these, although I believe Morley do make them with détentes now, but these don't have any détente. So stopping the train is not easy. If you cannot actually look at the controller, you go to stop it and you end up putting it into reverse. I much prefer the Gauge Master one. It's a combi style, it's not actually a combi, it's an older one. But anyway, so let's see if I can manage to operate this despite all my complaints and whatever. I'll zoom out a bit more. Go on then. See, this is where he has problems, see, that's what I thought. He can barely get over that point, and then I've got no free hand. Oh, blimey. It's very hard for me to get at him because I have to put the controller down if I'm not going to put the camera down. See, he just gets sort of stuck on that point. And he's not so much getting electrically stuck, he's getting physically stuck. He can't get over it. His wheels get sort of bound up in that point and he just can barely get over it. I think especially the rear pony truck gets caught in that point. So I can't really, leave him running because I've got to struggle to get him over that point. He's okay around the station and around the rest of the layout, but when it comes to trying to get over these glittering points, I'm trying to back up here. When it comes to trying to get over those points, he really struggles. Oh, see, I backed up and now he's got stuck again. Oh dear. Yeah, so he does not. He does not terribly usefully run on this layout, this guy. We'll go around one more time, see if we can get him to go around one more time. Can I stagger over that point? You see how he staggers and strains to get over that point? Okay, but he's not, on regular track he's quite operable, but we just pull him into the station there. Okay, we'll try the other one, which is a little bit easier. The controllers for the 2 tracks have sort of got tangled together here. So this guy's on the outer track. This is a bit later, this one. It's not quite so old, I don't think. And as you can see, it's a lot smoother running. chuff thing in the tender seems to have totally given up making sound. I can't hear it at all now. Now, well, you can hear it a bit if I shut up and you get close to it, but certainly this one is a lot happier run. This is modern, current Hornby set track. There might be a little bit of pico here and there, but most of it's modern Hornby set track that this layout's made with. And this guy's perfectly happy running on it, but the other guy not so much. Not over the points, anyway. But this guy, you know, this guy does go. These are beautiful coaches. I love these coaches. These are the Caledonian coaches. I don't know how they're probably sold separately. I don't really know. But they're the Caledonian coaches that come with the Caledonian, the last single-wheeler train pack, and they are really just beautiful coaches for sure. I love them. Anyway, obviously when I make him go slower, you can hear the chuff thing rather more. So we'll just pull that in there as well if we can. As I say, stopping the train accurately with this controller is a bit tricky because if I'm not looking at it, if I'm looking at the camera viewfinder, there's no date on, so I don't know when I'm stopping the train. But there you go. They do run. Actually, the newer one runs quite nicely. The older one's a bit of a struggle because he just struggles to get over the points. This is the other Triang Princess class that I have, and I did do some servicing on this. It could really do with new pickups amongst other things, which I didn't do because I didn't have them. I've had this one for a while. This does not have the clacky thing on the tender, but it does have a smoke generator, and it did actually generate some slight whiffs of smoke, but now it seems to have stopped doing so. I mean, it didn't generate anything you could call rhythmic puffs of smoke, but there was a slight whiff. I put some mineral oil in it, and there was a slight whiff came out at one point, but now it seems to have pretty much. Oh, well, yes, see, there are, I don't know whether you can see, but there are some very slight wisps of smoke coming out now. Yes. I don't know. Yes, actually you can see it more when it gets up by the light there than by the loco itself. See that smoke coming out of the loco? So clearly the heating element, I'm a bit nervous about doing much with it, but clearly the heating element working in this smoke generator is sort of working, although it's not really producing anything that looks like it doesn't look like a steam engine operating, but there is some vague smoke coming out of there. I have to wonder, I should have a look, I have to wonder whether how much it's coupled, the heating element appears to be working. I wonder if the pumpy thing's working. No, because it doesn't seem to be pumping in any sort of rhythmic way. I removed the body and had a look at the smoke generator. Removing this screw through the smoke generator allows the smoke generator to be lifted off the chassis. With the screw removed, the top of the smoke generator can be taken off. Inside, as you can see, there's some cotton wadding to soak up excess oil. The little thing that looks rather like a fuse at the left end is the heating element. The gear wheel on the right engages with the worm of the locomotor and pumps a piston in a tube, which delivers puffs of air into the interior of the smoke generator with the intention of forcing puffs of smoke out of the chimney. Well, the pump is definitely still hooked up and is sort of working, but I don't notice any particular tendency for the smoke to get pumped out. In as much as there is smoke, it just drifts out faintly. Not that I'm too bothered about that. In fact, I may end up totally disconnecting the smoke generator. In fact, I think that might be a better idea, but I just wanted to see if it had any inclination to work, and only very vaguely, I'd have to say. As you could see, I couldn't really get the smoke generator to do anything useful, although it did emit the odd wisp of smoke. I wasn't very keen on it anyway, as I know that they sometimes overheat and melt the plastic of the model, and of course they put load onto the model's motor as well. So I decided to decommission the smoke generator, although I didn't actually want to remove its body entirely, as the extra weight over the driving wheels could only be useful. With the driving rod on one side, the screw holding on the gear could be seen. I undid that screw, allowing me to remove the gear, driving rod and piston. You can see how that works here. I also removed the wire connecting to the heating element, then I screwed the smoke generator itself back in place on the chassis. So it seemed to me that the smoke deflector really wasn't doing any useful, so I basically removed its active components. I've detached the wire to the element, and I've taken out the wheel and the piston. I've put the the generator itself back on, just because it adds some extra weight to the front of the loco, so I think we might as well. So there we go. So the loco is still functioning basically the way it was, but now without the smoke generator actively working. Next, I decided to proceed with converting this version of the Triang Princess, the one I had originally, for 3-rail running on my Hornby 00 tabletop. Since this was a loco-driven tender engine with an XO4 type motor, I could convert it using a combination of the techniques that I used for the Hornby Ginty and the mainline Jubilee, rewiring the XO4 motor as with the Ginty, and connecting a 008F tender for centre rail pickup as with the Jubilee. I started by clipping the uninsulated side brush and removing the insulating sleeve from the spring clip. Since the insulated side was on the right as the model came, but I wanted the insulated side on the left so that I could connect the power from the centre rail there. I reconnected the red wire to the brush from which I just removed the insulating sleeve, so now power from the wheels on both sides of the loco was going to that brush. From the right side pickups through the red wire, and from the left side wheels which connect directly to the chassis through the spring clip itself. I cut a length of thin black wire and stripped and tinned the ends. I slipped one end of my wire under the brush on the insulated side. I tested the running of the motor by connecting power to the other end of my wire and to the chassis, and it worked okay. I drilled a hole in the cab wall of the body to allow my wire to be passed back to connect to the tender. When I tried to fit the body, my wire kept coming out from under its connection with the brush, so I made a contact piece from a short length of phosphor bronze strip, soldered that to the end of my wire, and bent that and fitted it into the bend in the brush, creating a more secure connection. I refitted the body, passing my wire back through the hole that I drilled in the cab wall. Note that the body retention screw for this version is visible on the top surface of the lower body at the front. I tested with power connected to the end of my wire and applied to the driving wheels on either side. This all worked okay. Now I needed to attach and connect a tender. I used the 008F tender that I'd refinished in crimson for use with the mainline Jubilee when I converted that for 3-rail running. It was fairly easy to disconnect the tender from the Jubilee. I just undid the screw on the tender end of the drawbar and unplugged the wire from the front of the tender. I made a connector for the end of my wire on the Princess by cutting and bending a small piece of brass sheet and soldered this to the end of the wire. That connector could then be plugged into the socket on the front of the 8F tender, making the connection. Now I needed to create some kind of drawbar for the Loco to pull the tender. The Triang Princess had a drawbar connected to the rear pony truck, which had a hole in the end, into which a pin on the front of the Triang tender fitted. I cut a piece of aluminium sheet and drilled it. I screwed my piece of sheet onto the tender using the original drawbar screw and hole. Then I put a 2mm by 10mm screw into the other end of my piece of sheet. Because my piece of sheet came out of the front of the 8F tender low with respect to the Triang drawbar, I put my connecting screw in facing upwards. I was then able to connect the Triang Princess to the 8F tender like this, with the wire plugged into the square socket in the front of the tender and the upward-facing pin in my piece of aluminium going up through the hole in the Triang drawbar. I got the model onto my 003 rail tracks for testing. So let's see how well this old Triang Princess Royal class manages to run, assuming it does actually run properly, 3-rail with the 8F tender. Well, he gets over that point that some others have difficulty getting over. I would say that's probably just because his pickups are better spaced out. Yeah, see, I don't see that point causes a lot of, that point at the left end there causes a lot of engines to hesitate, but I don't see him hesitating. Famous last words. No, I said it and he still didn't. Which is good, so his pickup is obviously working a bit better than a lot of models. And we're only running at about 33% power here. This is not a lot of power. Of course, he is a more modern, well, somewhat more modern engine, and I did service him at one point. Okay, let's see if he can do something with some coaches. Let's stop him a minute, and I'll get out some coaches, and we'll see how he manages with a couple of coaches. Okay, let's see how the Triang Princess Royal manages with a couple of coaches, if I can manage, assuming the coaches get through the tunnel. Let me just check that the tunnel looks well adjusted. Fairly well. It's, you know, because you've got to be careful, that tunnel's got to be well centered, else they won't get through. Okay, well, let's give him some power and see. Fairly well on the whole. Now these are the same two LMS coaches, Hornby 00 LMS coaches, like the ones that were in the Duchess of Atholl train set, that the Jubilee, the mainline Jubilee converted to 3-rail, had severe trouble pulling. He pulled them, but he got a lot of wheel slip going around there. This old Triang engine, although he's got no traction tyres or anything, And he's got no flanges on his centre driving wheel, so effectively he's really only got 4 driving wheels. Nevertheless, he's running with those coaches, I would say, basically fairly fine. He's maybe slowing down a bit round the end there, but he's actually slowing down rather than getting wheel slip, which would imply he's got fairly good grip. And we're basically running at the same power level I was running in light engine, about 33%. So I'm actually, I have to say, pretty impressed with how well this. Yeah, he's very controllable as well, famously. But he is really very controllable. You know, I can almost crawl with him. So I'm pretty impressed actually with how this old Triang Princess Royal runs 3-rail like that.